Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm working on some lineless watercolors. If you haven't been around for the past few of those, I've been really focusing on figuring out what I can do with that and where I can go with that. And it feels kind of funny saying lineless because I know the final product is not meant to be lineless for me. Personally, I love the look of line work. It's one of my favorite parts of other artists' work, and it's one of my favorite parts of painting, but for these, I wanted to have more of an adaptable way of approaching it. So that's what I'm going through with this process of figuring out what can I do that's more than what I've done with the line work so far. What can I do to release my creativity a little bit more? And for this one, there were a couple things that I wanted to focus on when I was practicing this technique. And one of the first ones is actually kind of simple in a way, but so far I've only done portraits, actually 2 portraits that were where I didn't start with micron line work before I started painting it. And I wanted to make sure that I did something that has at least a little bit more of the figure and hopefully the hands, and I have at least one hand in here because it does provide a different challenge. I wanted to make sure that I could still maintain the right contrast and make sure that things aren't getting too nondescript. I was a little bit worried of making sure that I could keep everything where it needed to be and the details correct beyond just a face. So that was one box that I needed to make sure I checked off in this piece. And another thing that I've been really excited about working with is having a negative space object in my painting, and that's where I wanted there to be no defining line work at all, and I just want the white of the paper to show through. I absolutely love this look in other paintings and other artists' work, so I wanted to be able to start incorporating that, and that's one of the challenges with, not that there's no way around it when you're using micron pens, but it kind of builds in a way that doesn't really allow that. I have to fight against it rather than have something that works with it really well. So this is a good opportunity to be able to try that out and see how I like it, which, spoiler alert, I actually really did like it, but I'll talk more about that when I get to that shape, the negative space that I do in this painting later on. So for this painting, since it was pretty simple, I had a pretty clear concept for the colors in my head. I actually like to do these smaller ones without doing much of a color comp. I find that it releases some of the restraints that I put on myself, so I'm able to enjoy it a little bit more. I do a little sheet where I put down the colors that I plan on using so I know that they look good together. And for simple things like this, where there's really only 3 basic areas that I was going to be coloring, I just had to figure out those and make sure that they coordinated the way I wanted it to. So for this one, I knew that the cornerstone for the color palette was going to be her skin color, which I wanted it to be this really candy red. I had so much fun painting this and being able to work with a different color palette than I normally do for that. I layered it up in a way that I think I could have made the layers work a little bit better for me. I started off with a yellow base, and I planned on using that for the highlights a little bit, but in the end it ended up getting covered up completely with the red, which is okay, but it would have been either better to utilize that first base layer or have omitted it and made the base layer something that was more conducive to the final product, if that makes sense. But that's something that's always evolving, the way that I tackle how I paint pretty much any object, but skin in particular. It's something that each time I do a painting, I find that it comes out just a little bit different. But I also found that I had an interesting challenge that I'm not used to running into, where I had some areas of her skin be an inconsistent color. So as I was painting it, some sections were a little bit warmer of a red and some were a little bit cooler of a red, which I think it was actually just because I had mixed up a pool of paint, and because I had mixed several different reds together, I think it settled a bit while I was using it, and for some reason I didn't mix it up while I was painting. That is a key thing to remember. If you're having issues with consistency of the color of what you're painting, a lot of times paint will separate like that, and you just have to keep mixing it so that every time you dip into it, it's completely homogenized, so it's the same mixture every time. But for this one, I kind of got a little separated, so I had chunks where it was more orange and more pink, but But I had an easy solution for that, and usually there's an easy solution. In the end, I ended up just doing a very light glaze of yellow to balance out the cooler reds, and a light glaze of my very cool cool red to go over the warmer reds that were on her skin. And eventually that balanced it out, so it looked a little bit more like it all belonged. And I think that hair is probably the thing I've been enjoying the most about being able to work linelessly. I found that I'm being a lot more adaptable to the way that I want to create new shapes, which it's really very fun to be able to control that in a way that's right in the moment rather than being stuck in the thing that I already planned out, which is oftentimes not really as conducive for the shadow shapes that I would like to create as they could be. Because I'm working in lines, I don't always have everything planned out as far as what's going to be brought back into shadow. And of course, I can always push things back into shadow, but I find that when I'm working like this with this kind of a technique, I'm a lot more aggressive with where I'm pushing things back, where I'm putting things forward, and I'm thinking a little bit more about the highlights as I'm working on them. So overall, I just think that I'm a little bit more present with the painting process, and with the process of being able to put in line work as I'm working on it means that I can put in details where I want it to be and none where I don't want it to be. And I can have much lighter line work against more highlighted areas and darker line work where it's going to be darker. So it's just way more fluid and enjoyable. And it feels a lot more like a process than a thing that I'm just kind of going along with, going through the motions and fitting in with the same routine that I have. I'm thinking about it as I'm working on it, which feels really nice to be able to work on a piece and feel like at that moment I'm making it something better rather than just completing a task. The small downside, though, very small, is that it takes me quite a bit longer to paint the hair than it did, even including the line work and the painting all together. And I think it's because it's a lot of reasons, but one of the things is that I have to be a lot more cohesive with the way that I'm thinking, I guess, because I don't work in the same way that I used to anymore. I don't do one solid layer and then build up the shadows on top of that. Now I'm working in strands more, where I'll paint the base layer and then the shadows and build up on it, because I don't want to completely cover up any of the sketch that I have that I transferred over. I don't want to ruin what I do have there, because I still want to be able to tie into the sketch that I have. So I do it piece by piece, and that comes with pros and cons. I think the big pros are that I am thinking more thoroughly about where the highlights are going to be, and it gives me a better avenue than I used to have of making sure that I build that into each strand, or to at least think about where it could be. And I've also found that it's a little bit harder to make sure that everything has the colors that I want to, and that there's consistency throughout for where the values are and the levels of values. So for this one, I found that and by no means is it supposed to be consistent throughout, but it does have to be thoughtful. But I found that for this one, as I was working on it, the lower right-hand area of her hair had a lot of darks in it, which is what I originally wanted. And then behind her to the left, it started to get a lot more pale and desaturated in a way that it felt unbalanced. So that was something that I had to go back and revisit a lot of the areas that I had previously painted, because I got a little bit narrowed in on the scope of what I was painting, where I was painting that lock of hair, and I forgot to look at all of the hair to make sure that it was balanced in the way that I wanted it to, and it still had the contrast that I wanted, it still had the value that I wanted, but also the variety, so it wasn't homogeneous throughout. But that is something that I'm finding is a lot more easy when I'm working no lines. It's a lot easier to make sure that there's more variety in the way that I'm attacking the hair, so it's not all the same kind of shadow, same base layer, minimal highlights, because somehow I always end up destroying the highlights when I'm working this way, or the way before I had it. So yeah, it's easier to make things more distinct and more varied. And that final area that I did not paint, the negative space, was her shirt, and I loved how it pops off. I think it really looks interesting in a way that I haven't done in my artwork before, so it was really fun to incorporate something new like that. I did end up going in very, very minimally, cleaning up the edges just a little bit with my white gel pen, I would have done it more, except for some reason it was not really behaving correctly, but I did use that a bit to clean it up, and I was a little tempted when I was working on this to go in and add a shadow where like her hair would be laying on the shirt, and I think it would have looked cool, but I'm glad that I resisted and let it be what I originally envisioned so I can see how I like it and see what I want to do moving forward. But I think that certainly is something that I think could look really cool, where I could have negative white space of an object and then still have a very nice pale shadow of another object that maybe is laying on top of it. I think that would push almost an optical illusion effect to it that would be really cool. And that is it for today. I do have the original painting available at my art shop. There's a link down in the description. And I also have prints of her available as well. So if you'd like a cheaper art option, I've got that available. I also have a list to all the tools that I use to create this painting down in the description below. And I have a link to my Patreon, so if you want to help support this channel and also get some exclusive content, as well as a few exclusive videos that I'm currently working on right now, that is all down in the description. But I will be back on Wednesday with another video, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you then.